Well, let's begin with the basics as we get back to business for the US Grand Prix in Austin. Max Verstappen has taken the pole for the sprint race. Yes, it's another sprint weekend, and he did so in difficult conditions because it was unbelievably close. As you can see from the lap times there, 32.833 for Max, 32.854 for George Russell in a Mercedes featuring a considerable number of upgrades and looking pretty good as a result, despite both George and Lewis having very lurid spins in the one and only untimed practice session earlier on Friday before the qualifying for the sprint race. So Mercedes starting to look quite good, but I think they potentially lost the pole by sending both drivers out incredibly early in both SQ2, sprint qualifying 2, and SQ3, the final thing. And when Lewis actually got out on the track in SQ2 and he was out there not seeing anybody in his mirrors, said, why are we out so early? And they said, oh, traffic. Of course, traffic is bad in SQ1 when all 20 cars are on track. SQ2, that's down to 15. SQ3, it's down to 10. And Max Verstappen began his fastest lap, the lap which got him the pole, with 18 seconds to go as he crossed the start-finish line to begin that lap. Whereas at that point, both Mercedes drivers are in the garage, and it being a new track surface, it was obvious that the track was going to get quicker and quicker and rubber in. And so I think Mercedes were conservative in terms of their management, and that possibly lost them the pole. Although, ironically, and of course nobody could have predicted this, Lewis lost his lap because a yellow came out when Franco Colapinto spun the Williams Mercedes. There weren't many cars on track at that point, but he happened to get the yellow, and that accounted for Lewis's poor time. Anyway, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but if you look at the lap times there, Max 32.833, George 32.854, you can see how close it was, and you can see how if they had gone out a little bit later in the track had been quicker, George and or Lewis for that matter might have been on the pole. Ferrari were out right at the end, 33.059. I think they can be pretty happy with that lap from Charles Leclerc. I think it was pretty representative. As you can see, it's basically the same lap time between Charles, Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz, and you can almost throw in Nico Hulkenberg for that matter, 33.1, but the others on 33.0, very, very close around Austin. You'd imagine in Austin with that long straight and the fast medium speed corners, some very quick corners there, some 7th gear entry corners in sector 1, and then 7th gear in the exit of the long right-hander in sector 3. Another part of the road they go in 5th gear, the corner after that. Some quick corners there and also some hairpins. You'd imagine with all that going on there'd be quite a lot of differentiation between the teams, but they're not. I guess it's just a sign of how at the back end of this regulation, which came into force in 2022, there've been very few major changes to the regulations, that everybody's kind of bouncing off the maximum they can do at any given moment. Only some teams get it right most of the time, of course. As an adjunct to all that, then let's just have a look at the speed trap in SQ3, which is the only session in which they ran the soft tyre, the medium tyre in SQ1, SQ2. So top speed's not really relevant or as relevant as they should be with SQ3 on the soft tyres. And you can see there, that's in the order in which they qualified. Max 3.26 through the trap, which is right at the end of the main straight, just for the braking area. George Russell 3.30, so Mercedes considerably quicker in a straight line. Charles Leclerc 3.29, quicker in a straight line again, and then Lando Norris 3.25. So you could say from that, I think, that bearing in mind how good Max was over the overall lap, that Red Bull had more downforce than George Russell and Charles Leclerc with Mercedes and Ferrari, and Lando Norris has about the same downforce but didn't quite get the lap in. And I wonder, looking at the telemetry of the cars, and I wonder if the explanation for Lando being P4 is his and Oscar Piastri's rather odd use of second gear for the hairpin. They go through the very impressive S's and they go down the hill to that hairpin. The McLarens are taking that, with the Mercedes engine, taking it in second gear, whereas the factory Mercedes and Williams Mercedes taking it in third, as are Ferrari, as are Red Bull Honda. And as a result, if you look at the telemetry, you can see that Lando and Oscar are getting 8th gear a little bit later on the straight than their opposition. And I wonder whether McLaren, there's nothing they can do about gearing. It's pretty fixed for the year. I think they can make one change. And I wonder whether McLaren are suffering a little bit on gearing, the gear ratios they've chosen, because it is odd that they're so out of sync with everybody else in using second for the hairpin. And I wonder whether that was one of the reasons, because around the rest of the lap they look pretty good. You see Oscar Piastri there way down, didn't even make it out of SQ1. He was actually fourth quickest in SQ1, quicker than Lando, but that lap he ran wide in that fifth gear corner, which is the second last corner of the lap. It's a very quick corner. They're coming out of the long right-hander in seventh and then down to fifth entry. And the back end just got away from him. It looked really good. He just held the slide on the curb and got back on, Terry Neville style. But track limits came into play and he lost the lap. So he didn't get out of SQ1. He would have been very annoyed by that. But that'll be something he'll be banking, of course, as we go into the proper qualifying for the Grand Prix tomorrow. Other notable performance, I mean, Carlos Sainz was very good throughout the day, I thought. Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin Magnussen both really good in the Haas Ferraris. That team just looking better and better, now carrying, of course, the Gazoo Racing Toyota logos with their new association with Toyota, looking really good. Lewis obviously not happy with that, not happy to be beaten by George, not happy to have had that moment, and he did that incredibly lurid spin in a quick part of the circuit in the S's in free practice this morning. He'd just got past Nico Hülkenberg, who was going quite slowly. He was slightly offline and hit a bump. They were running quite low on the car. Sparks came out and the car just bottomed out and he lost it. Big 360, high-speed 360. We don't often see Lewis Hamilton having moments like that. I wonder if he can take it all in his old age. Well, he recovered really well, and he wouldn't have been too happy with the result of practice. Yuki Tsunoda was put under a bit of pressure from Liam Lawson this morning. Liam looked really good and was pretty good in SQ1 as well, but didn't get out of SQ2, whereas Yuki did, so 0.2 quicker. He'll be pleased with that. Franco Colapinto, again a star for Williams, with Alex Albon spinning his way out of getting into Q3, whereas absolutely no problem at all for Franco Colapinto, despite a big moment when he got bought quite badly by Pierre Gasly's Alpine and had to back out of the lap. He nonetheless got through to Q3, and look at that, really good job by Franco Colapinto again in the Williams Mercedes. Sergio Perez, very disappointing in the Red Bull Honda. A second a lap slower than Max on the medium tyre in Q2. Really no excuse for that. And just beginning to look like maybe he will retire after Mexico. I mean, I'm not saying he will, but I mean, the way it's going at the moment, he started to look pretty good, and there's no excuse for him to be that slow around somewhere like Austin in a car as good as obviously as the Red Bull RB20 is. And then Lance Stroll, actually slightly quicker than Fernando Alonso when push came to shove today. Quite a lot of upgrades on the Aston Martin, but none of them seem to be doing much for the team or the car at the moment. Of course, all but Ferrari seem to have quite major upgrades, and Williams, I think, with the other team, haven't really brought much. And Liam Lawson, as I say, pretty good. Looked pretty racy out there, 34.6, but quite wide entries, quite aggressive with the throttle, as we know he is, and great car control, and looked very professional. Whether or not Daniel would have done a better job than that remains to be seen, of course, but it's only his first race since he's come back, so there we go. Alpine, not brilliant. Esteban Ocon there, and the Stake Saubers, well, just where they always are. And as I say, there were quite a lot of upgrades for Austin. There was this 3-week period between Singapore and Austin. We're going into 2 triple headers now, so it's probably the last period of really big upgrades we're going to see. And I've just got a list there of the top teams. I say Ferrari haven't really done very much. Obviously slight mods for the circuit, but nothing in terms of radical changes. And you'd think at the moment that most of the upgrades would be with Mercedes and Red Bull, and McLaren would be in the sort of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mode. But look at that. McLaren, quite a lot of work they've done on that, particularly, and not necessarily cooling or things like that. They're all performance things, front wing, front suspension, that's profiles of the front suspension. And when we look at the front and rear corners, some of it is to do with cooling, but it's only to do with cooling due to aero changes they've made around the 4 corners of the car. And then a beam wing mod as well. And all of a sudden, Red Bull and Mercedes looking quite good. Look at Red Bull, floor edge. That's quite a big change for them. It's quite a big deal. It doesn't say much. It's only 2 words, but floor edge. And the actual description for that, as they described it to the FIA, which they have to do now, is revised edge wing camber over rearward third of the floor, with more local camber in the edge wing over its rearmost third. More local load is generated whilst maintaining flow stability. I mean, that's quite a big aero change for Red Bull, given how aero sensitive they are anyway. And then they've got an engine cover mod as well, which that was basically cooling, so that possibly will be improving their engine performance stroke reliability as well. But look at the number of changes Mercedes have actually listed with the FIA. Front wing reduces front wing wake, front suspension reprofiled upper wishbone fairing, floor edge, additional vane element added to the floor edge wing, side pod inlet, lower lip of side pod inlet moved rearwards, engine cover, additional cooling exit local to rear suspension legs, minimizing impact on downstream components such as the rear wing, reprofiled inboard fence, improving both local and downstream load through better onset flow. So a lot of stuff going on at Mercedes, and the car, you could have gone away this morning and said, wow, it looks very edgy, because they had those two spins, but they were both sort of cold tire-ish, traffic-y, running low ride height spins. And when it came down to qualifying, looking really good. George Russell looked really impressive, I thought. And both of them did an interesting fuel run this morning as well, putting in a lot of laps with fuel in the car. It was kind of a reverse order in free practice this morning, because we're used to seeing Red Bull in a dominant position and doing one or two cursory laps on soft tyres and then putting fuel in the car, putting on the medium tyres and going out and doing 20-lap fuel runs while everybody else is still trying to get their car sorted. Well, how times have changed, because Red Bull still running the soft tyre. They went out on the soft tyre first in FP1 just to get a feel for the grip, and then continued to try to set the car up around that soft tyre. Another reason maybe why Max was so good in qualifying today. And then right at the end they put fuel in the car and did some fuel runs right at the end there. You can see quite slow, 40.5 on the soft tyre. Everybody else was on the hard tyre and doing proper fuel runs, as I say. I mean, looks like proper fuel runs, and they're all doing 37s, 38s. And look at the work that George Russell was doing on the full tank runs, 45, 37.4, 37.4, 37.2, very impressive. Look at Charles Leclerc, 37.0, okay, and 36s. Didn't do as many laps though. Carlos Sainz, 37.3, 37.2. And look, George right there with Lando Norris, you could say, in terms of, and Oscar Piastri. Oscar and George look to have the same amount of fuel in, given the number of laps they did. And in the middle of it, George is doing 37.6, 37.2, 37.4, and he's going slightly quicker than Oscar Piastri. So that's good work by Mercedes, and they'll be quite encouraged by that full tank run there, I think. Whereas Max on the soft tyre couldn't really make any judgment on that. Either the tyres were much slower at that point, or he's running a massive amount of fuel compared to everybody else. Unlikely. Red Bull have a very good all-round car, no question about that. But Mercedes look good. But again, you got to say management stroke organisation strategy maybe. Does it come in a strategy, sending those cars out so early? It's not a circuit that's that bad for traffic. I'm surprised that they did that. They were so paranoid about traffic and they had them out so early. I'm not quite sure why they would have done that. But anyway, there you are. Max is on the pole, but it's not a massive advantage at COTA. We've seen that before. George alongside him, so it should be an interesting first corner there for the sprint race. Charles Leclerc will be there in perfect grandstand position to watch it all. And Lando there too, obviously probably slightly dissatisfied, but equally, probably going to get a very good run on full tanks out of the hairpin with these second gear runs. Mind you, everybody else will probably be running second gear with more fuel in the car for the race as well. So yeah, that strange anomaly, that second gear in the hairpin for McLaren. But otherwise, they do look good. Oscar Piastri's fifth gear antics aside. So that's it for Friday. Looking forward to qualifying in the sprint race. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to Track Ninja, and you, of course, the viewer. See you soon.